All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, the weather in Mexico is nicer than the weather here in the United States on the East Coast in New York and New Jersey. I hope everybody is doing well. I wanted to cover Chapter 5, Early Positivism. These are the biological theories of crime. So, if you keep in perspective that we are constantly yearning to try to answer the question of why someone commits a crime. Well, this is going to be one of those reasons that is brought forward by scientists, by social scientists, by criminologists, by medical doctors, and they're going to examine the biology of the individual to see if, for some reason, there was something going on in that person's mind or body that led the individual to commit crime. Now, keep in mind when we're talking about this, some of these theories are the initial ones, and they've been, uh, debunked because of the advances in science. So let's take a look at what Chapter 5 is. Why did they do it? The science behind the crime. Why does the government do what does the government do with those who don't measure up? So this is one of the questions that we're going to look at in the area of Nazi biocriminology, because the Nazis uh, they actually sought to exterminate those that didn't measure up. Overwhelmingly, they felt that the eradication of the Jews was something that they needed to do to save Germany. I mean, it's a distorted, horrific way of thinking. But they also looked at their own people that they felt had some type of infirmary, and the main way to deal with them was to get rid of them. So here, the science behind crime. Now we're looking at different scientific theory. The early biological theories of crime primarily focus on the fact that certain individuals or groups tend to offend more than others, and that such inferior individuals should be controlled or even eliminated. Think about that. Controlled or eliminated. So, to deal with somebody who we believe to be inferior, whatever standards we are incorporating, if they don't measure those standards, then we have to deal with them in a rather horrific manner. So one of the very early ways of doing this was through eugenics, which is scary. I mean, think about it. The study and policies related to the improvement of the human race via control over selective reproduction, meaning that in the societies where this was offered as a solution, it meant sterilizing individuals, taking out their reproductive organs or their ability to reproduce. This was in the early to mid 1800s. And even here in the United States, we continue to have some belief in this particular theory up through the 1930s and 40s. So it's stuck around for a very long time, and it was very sad what the government was doing in these types of situations. Craniometry. So here is the study of the cranium, of the skull. And some of the early scientists that were looking into this basically said, we can look at a person's skull size and determine whether or not they are a criminal. So, it kind of makes you laugh now, but it shows you how the thinking was way back then. The definition, the belief that the size of the brain or skull represented through superiority or, in the alternative, the inferiority of certain individuals or ethnic racial groups. I want you to keep in mind that a lot of these theories are paid for by Western European rich, noble individuals. All of those individuals at the time were white, and many of them had racist ideations, racial ideas in their mind, thinking that the white race was superior to any other race that was out there. So these studies sought to further that type of thought process, and it's a very distorted way of thinking. There's different ways to measure up. If a person's living, they measure the circumference of the skull. If the person has recently had been died or is dead, they measure the weight or volume of the brain. If the individual had died a long time before, they pour some of the seeds into the skull area and then measure the volume by pouring the seeds into a graduated cylinder. Later, they would use buckshot and ball bearings. So, very rudimentary start to try to look at volume inside of the head. Craniometry, the subjects of white Western European descent tended to show far more superiority over other ethnic groups. Well, the reason that that finding occurred is because those are the people that were paying for this experiment, and they wanted to put forward these findings in this way. The front portion of the brain, or the genu, is larger and superior in individuals and groups. The hind portion of the brain, the splenium, is larger in lesser individuals and groups. Bias. They knew that they did exactly what researchers shouldn't do, and that's the real problem here. They knew which brains and skulls were of which ethnic racial groups before they were measured, making for a very unethical and totally improper methodology of craniometry. Studies were done without knowing which skulls and brains from certain ethnic racial groups showed only a small correlation between the size of the skull and brain with certain behaviors or personality. Phrenology. This actually, I mean, once again, rudimentary, going way back in time, but this actually, is borne out in future research. And one of the keys of phrenology was that different parts of our brain control different functions and different emotions. And science has later determined that to be accurate. So, this, even though it was just in the early infancy stages, had some relevance, significant relevance to modern day thinking. The definition, the science of determining human dispositions based on distinctions in the skull, which are believed to conform to the shape of the brain. This assumed that a bump or abnormality on the skull directly related to an abnormality in the brain at that spot. So there was a correlation, the brain and an abnormality in a particular location. Phrenology did, as I say, got some things right. Certain parts of the brain are indeed responsible for specific tasks, but the extent to which they believed that bumps on the skull could indicate who would most be disposed to criminal behavior was inaccurate. So, it did get some right, but basically they said they could feel a person's skull. And the good thing is, I can demonstrate that because of the lack of hair on my head. It happens to be a pretty smooth skull. But for some individuals, if they had bumps, a phrenologist would say, well, that person is this, a deviant, a criminal. This person is more likely to steal because I feel this bump here. So, a lot of that was just speculative, wrong, but, it was one of those things where they, obviously were just kind of, at the very infancy stages of this type of theory. Physiognomy. This is this is a little crazy. This theory. I always like teaching this chapter in class because when we look at a couple of these examples, it gets to be rather comical. The definition: the study of facial and other bodily aspects in order to indicate developmental problems such as criminality. Early studies focused on contrasting various racial and ethnic groups to each other in order to prove that certain groups of individuals were superior or inferior to others. Once again, excuse me, this justification being put forward to be divisive. It's dividing the races, and it's a very racist kind of point of view. And this is done in light of who is, paying for these studies. The individuals who were flipping the bill, they had an interest in having certain results. And here's, examples of physiognomy in the PowerPoint. Part of the theory is, if individuals looked like animals in certain respects, they were more apt to be deviant or more apt to be criminal in nature. So this guy looks, like a lion. But, keep in mind, a lot of these photographs that were being used by these early believers in physiognomy are racist. They're improper. There's a bias there. And it's totally, as you can see, I mean, totally inappropriate. but they attempted to show that criminals' facial profiles resemble those of animals. And, this was a kind of an idea that, you know, individuals are evolving from animals, and those that haven't evolved enough are individuals that are closer to being animals than to being human beings, and individuals that are more apt to violate the law. As I said, it's wrong. Darwin's influence. So Darwin is a huge influence here when we start to study biology. When Darwin comes along in his work, The Origin of the Species, this made a huge impact on societal views regarding the rank and order of groups in societies. This laid the groundwork for what would become the first major scientific theory of crime, namely Cesar Lombroso's theory of born criminals. And Lombroso is one of my favorite characters in criminology. His thinking, it's early on, but his thinking, in some instances, is pretty spot on. So, Darwin, how the species originated, the very, very important now in these early stages of criminology when we're trying to determine, what could have contributed to an individual committing a crime. Here is Lombroso in the middle here, and Lombroso would study skulls. He would study individuals who were criminals, and Lombroso would say, by looking and researching skulls and looking at the faces of criminals and the way their heads are shaped and their faces are shaped, he said, I can tell who's a criminal or not just by looking at him. Lombroso actually ends up getting hired by the Italian government to determine whether people are guilty or not. I mean, think about that. So Lombroso's impact is tremendously huge in this area. And here's my little joke here. Could this apply today? Well, look at the sketch artist of an individual wanted for a crime, and you look at the sketch on the left, and you're like, "Come on, there's no way anybody can look like that." And then you have the suspect on the right, a pretty good sketch. He looks a lot like him. So, I thought that was a little funny bit of humor. Here, his theory. This is the first attempt at scientific theory within criminological thought. So really groundbreaking. Lombroso comes in and kind of changes the dynamic of this. The Criminal Man in 1876. That's when I went to college, so I was very familiar with it. Outlined a theory of crime that largely brought together pre-Darwinian theories of chronometry, um, phrenology, and physiognomy. And what he did was take all of these theories and take what he thought were the best parts of it and incorporate it, largely based on certain groups and individuals being atavistic and likely to be born to commit crime, a natural born criminal. Atavistic, a person or a feature of an individual that is a throwback to an earlier stage of evolutionary development. The type of offenders, mentally ill and criminaloids, committed minor offenses due to external or environmental circumstances. Born criminals were the most serious and violent criminals in any society. The way that he could identify criminals was through stigmata, physical manifestations of atavism, and physical features being an indication of earlier evolutionary stages. So stigmata. Stigmata has a religious context too. Many in the Catholic faith or Christian faith believe certain individuals have a stigmata to show manifestations of their closeness with God. What Lombroso was doing is saying that these stigmata, these are our indicators. These are the things that we can look at that ultimately can determine whether an individual is involved in criminality. Stigmata is a way for all of us in society to look and see, and if we see it, we gotta a natural born criminal. There was a movie, Natural Born Killers, that bases it on the stigmata approach. Here, these physical manifestations of the atavism, um, more than 5 stigmata indicate an individual is atavistic. Lombroso, from time to time, would change his list as he went along. He would make revisions to it. He would say, "Oh, my initial thought on this area wasn't necessarily 100% correct, so let me start doing it this way." He also claimed that he could identify the stigmata of certain types of individuals. His list included abnormally small or large noses. So think about this. If a person had a small nose, that's one of the factors Lombroso could say that you were potentially a born criminal. Or a big nose, ears, eyes, jaws, basically any physical feature. He also included some extra physiological features, such as tattoos. He said that if a person had a tattoo, that was one of the stigmata on the list. I mean, come on now. Especially in contemporary society, tattoos are more popular than they've ever been now, and very common throughout different socioeconomic communities, different age groups, different genders. So that this obviously points to the fact that this had little or no bearing, or somebody having, the medical condition of epilepsy. He said this was an atavistic feature, and we know that that's something that is totally inappropriate to kind of consider. Here is the simian crease, the normal crease of a hand in a baby. The simian crease goes straight across. So the normal creases go for about halfway, and then another half of the hand. The simian crease is one of the many minor physical anomalies recognized by modern medical science as a manifestation of earlier developmental disorders. Um, he's also not only the father of criminology, but the father of the positive school, determinism, the assumption that most human beings' behavior is determined by factors beyond free will and free choice. The positive school, based on fundamental predictions that factors outside of free will and free choice, such as biological, psychological, and sociological variables, determine the choices we make regarding all types of behavior. So, these um, outside of free will and free choice, all these other factors go into the melting pot. And that's one of the reasons why the positive school has remained so relevant, is because most people agree there are so many different factors that can be used to determine criminality. Lombroso was called in to testify in criminal trials, believe it or not. The Italian government would say, "Can you come in and testify? Is this person a criminal or not? Is this person guilty or not guilty?" I mean, think about it. It really was bizarre that he was considered to have the ability to determine guilt or innocence just by looking at a person. Identifying young children on the basis of being observed, on the basis of observed stigmata. This led to tracking or isolating certain children based on such criteria. Think how dangerous that is. Kind of what the Nazis did, looking at factors and saying, okay, we're going to monitor you or eliminate you. I mean, the horrific, barbaric acts that the Nazis undertook during the Holocaust and during World War II against their own people, makes everyone shudder. IQ testing area, another area of controversy. So here, this was originated in France by Alfred Binet. IQ was calculated as chronological age divided by mental age, then multiplied by 100, with the average score being 100. Binet argued that IQ scores could change over time, um, meaning that your IQ could go up or down. Goddard, H. Goddard, used IQ testing in the United States for purpose of deporting. Think about that. People whose IQ didn't measure up would be deported out of the country, sterilizing, taking away their right to reproduce, and otherwise ridding society of low IQ individuals. He argued that IQ scores were static or innate; they could not change. Whatever a person's IQ was, it stayed. He labeled low IQ as somebody of feeble-mindedness, and then listen to the labels that he had from the highest level to the lowest level of intelligence: morons, imbeciles, and idiots. Real nice, right? So he came up with this labeling for IQ and said, look, if you have feeble-mindedness, there are three levels of it. The highest level of feeble-mindedness is a moron, the middle level is an imbecile, and the lowest level is an idiot. The biggest threat to progress of humanity was the existence of morons. Goddard said morons meet other morons, and then they have moronic children. I mean, it sounds like a very pretentious kind of approach. Goddard was proud uh, of the increase in deportations in the United States of potential immigrants based on his studies, his IQ studies. He realized that his policy recommendations were not based on accurate science. He lowered the score for feeble mindedness from a mental age of 12 to a mental age of 8. So along the way, he would just change the parameters. Toward the end of his career, he admitted intelligence could be improved. Buck versus Bell. I studied this in law school. It was a very, very sad case. Here, the Supreme Court of the United States discussed this issue of sterilization. And if individuals had scored real low, or parents had scored real low, and they were mentally deficient on various testing or intelligence scales, the Supreme Court said that they could be forcibly sterilized for the purposes of limiting reproduction among individuals. These were deemed as being feeble minded individuals. Very sad part of the law here in the United States. Thousands upon thousands of people who didn't measure up were forcibly sterilized. Hershey and Hindelgang examined the effect of intelligence on youths in the 1970s. In this particular study, they found that even among youth in the same race and social class, intelligence had a significant effect on delinquency and criminality among individuals. The studies have since shown that school education, degrees, a minimum of a high school education or a GED opens up certain doors for individuals. Getting that next degree, an associate's degree, even more opportunity. Getting a bachelor's degree, more opportunity. A master's degree, a doctorate degree, whatever it may be. And what these studies have shown is the more education an individual gets, the less likely that person will be involved in criminality. Why? They're going to usually get a great job. They're going to have the opportunity to earn an income. They're not going to be involved in crime then as a result of that. Sheldon's model of somatotyping, body types: endomorphic, an individual who's obese; mesomorphic, athletic or muscular; or ectomorphic, thin. Each body type was measured on a scale of 1 to 7, with 7 being the highest score. Each somatotype had the following order: endomorphy, mesomorphy, and ectomorphy. Body types matched personality traits or temperaments. An individual who was viscerotonic, an endomorphic individual, tended to be more jolly or lazy. So here are the labels that are associated with different body types, all through some of the studies and ideas by Sheldon of somatotyping. Looking at body types and saying, okay, this is going to be your personality based on how your body looks. Somatotonic. This is mesomorphic individuals tended to be risk takers and aggressive, the athletic types. Cerebrotonic, ectomorphic individuals tended to be intelligent and shy, thinner individuals. Mesomorphics had the highest propensity towards violence, towards risk. Policy implications: screening of medical at birth and early childhood, especially regarding minor physical anomalies. Here, having same-sex classes for children in school. More screening should be done regarding the IQ and aptitude levels of young children to identify which children require extra attention. Schools are doing a lot of things with coming up with individual educational plans, IEPs, classifying students that need this extra help. Why? Because without it, those students are going to have such difficulty. They're going to, really struggle. So by having those additional services, the opportunities are magnified, and shouldn't every student have that same opportunity? All right, so that concludes everybody this week. Don't forget, to do all the work in the module, and I'll see you all in a week. And best of luck. Okay, so take care.